every board is different, not every board, or every state has a board and it falls under a different entity, but every state there is a process, and so you would need a lawyer to represent you and call in, figure out who these attorneys recommend as far as professional liability insurance, because you don't know what happened. Now, back to this case, this is, microfiche. I know I got down a rabbit hole there. Don't even, remember the case. And now you're trying to defend conduct that was, oh my gosh, decades ago. Even more reason why I say every day, all day long on all my platforms, in my charting courses, in my intro to legal nursing, when I speak, not charted, not done. It could be decades later. Nurses think that that's like hyperbole, and now here we are. And I'm not going to tell you, this is not the first time that I've seen this, especially on the civil side, because once a case is filed, it could take years. And now look what happened over COVID. I mean, cases were pushed back. And now you're a nurse involved in this, and you're like, oh my gosh, were we even documenting that? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, it's tricky. So now how are you trying to defend your conduct in front of the board of nursing? And there will not be any forgiveness as far as it pertains to that. I've seen that repeatedly. Very few states have any kind of just culture written. I only know one, North Carolina Board of Nursing. So if you think that you're going to be extended any courtesies, I mean, just be careful. I do not believe that to always be true. You got to make sure that you know the rules and regulations that dictate your professional license, and that you're documenting, you're following those policies, you know what those policies are, and have professional liability insurance. And um, I beat that to a horse. And you can be reported, and you do have to report if you have been found civilly negligent in a case. On your eligibility questions, when you renew every 2 years, your employer may even ask you that question, that because it could put you on the National Practitioner Database or the Office of Inspector General list, the OIG list. If you're on some of these lists, you can't be in a building where they take insurance, and now you're working in a hospital. So even nurses don't realize, myself, the attorney, oftentimes tell them you need to get the policy, you need to get the handbook, and you need to look up what it says as it pertains to if you have to report if you've been found civilly negligent in a case, because it could end you up on one of these lists. If you are disciplined by a board of nursing, there will be a policy, something in the handbook that says, more likely than not, in my experience, I do not know that to be true. At the last organization I was with, a nurse came to me. There were several nurses. They didn't like this person, unfortunately. Saw that they got a DUI, because I don't know if you guys have seen this site. I believe it's called Busted, or and it has people's mugshots, and they saw this person's mugshot circulating around. I was asked if a nurse who held a leadership position even got a DUI or DWI, and those are different things. Were they going to lose their license and stop? That's not necessarily how this works. And then what their responsibility was within the organization. I quickly looked it up. Anyone could look it up. The policy did say within 10 business days, and I was actually pretty shocked. Part of it was just for my own education, that they do have to report it to their leadership. It's their responsibility. Different from the Board of Nursing. The Board of Nursing has very different rules and regulations, or the agency that's giving you the privilege to practice, whether you're in Texas, Nebraska, Ohio, California. Every state has a different entity that's giving you the privilege to practice, but has clear guidelines as it pertains to anyone who has gotten a DUI or DWI is that they have a duty to protect the public and not us. And that was kind of brand new information to me when I was out of board. I was like, wait, what? And then just what I was hearing and seeing, I was like, whoa, this is like no joke stuff. So you need to remember that you will be evaluated for fitness to practice. Fitness to practice. You need to make sure that you look that up. That's a big, huge deal. And I would love to tell you that even if you got a DUI or DWI before you become a nurse, are you going to be investigated for fitness to practice? You are. Even if you were 19, 20, 21, and now you're 57 and you decide that you're going to go to nursing school and become a nurse, will you be evaluated fitness to practice? In my experience, yes. The board has a duty to make sure that you are fit to practice and has to make sure that you do not have some kind of substance use disorder, any mental health issue. They have to check their box off by a provider. So let's unpack that. What does it mean when you are being evaluated for fitness to practice? That means that you have to be evaluated, in my experience, by a provider. This is another one of the frequently asked questions. I'm just skipping ahead to one of the ones I do get asked about: DUI, DWI, anything involving PI, public intoxication. You get arrested, you get charged with anything, you go on diversion. So this is all around anything that pertains to that. You need to go to the National Council for State Boards of Nursing. You need to research fitness to practice. I'm going to keep saying that. That's a big, huge deal. You need to understand what that means and what your requirement is as it pertains to that. If you're a nursing student, you're looking into going into nursing, you need to look up declaratory order under the school as well as the board. Who gives direction to the school, or who allows the school to allow us, a nurse, to call themselves a nurse? A nurse is a protected word given by the board, the agency that's providing the privilege to practice, and that's all dictated by educational requirements, all that stuff. But they set the rules and regulations, and part of that is the declaratory order that they have to adopt into the student handbook, not unlike the employee handbook when you're within an organization, where it does talk about the declaratory order that you will have to fill out to let them know, and you have to declare that you had a DUI, DWI, PI, any variations of those words, and you're declaring it. What have I seen as it pertains to that? As long as it didn't rise to the level of a felony, there normally is not a lot of pushback. Now, even if it rose to the level of felony, does that mean that you could not go to nursing school or could not be a nurse? No, that does not mean that. And every state is different, and you need to make sure that you look at all the requirements, what that means, the long term. When I talk to nurses, and another question that I get asked, and we'll just move forward to that one as well. We'll just pivot into that one. Can I practice if I have a felony? And let's just say it's related to a DUI. A nurse reached out to me and said, I got a felony DUI, and it was based on, I believe, the damages to the other person involved. And the board in California, I do believe it was California, Nevada, don't quote me on that, looking into her and what that meant, because it rose to a felony and they were going to revoke her license. They were asking for the revocation of her license, and by the mere language of that, unfortunately, it did lead to the revoking. If you look at the license, for oftentimes a minimum of 5 years. Her and her attorney and I were talking about it, and I said I would ask to come back as long as you're doing everything and you're not under still criminal probation, and ask for the reevaluation of it a year in. Because again, it doesn't necessarily mean you can't go to school and or be a nurse if you've had any kind of felony as it pertains to DUI, DWI, PI. But there's gonna be a lot of nuances around that. And each board gets to decide and why you need to get legal representation and educate yourself. Educate yourself before you get the attorney on the phone, because you know what? They start billing in increments of 15 minutes. So start with the National Council for State Boards of Nursing. Understand what it means to be charged with a felony. Is it going to matter if there was abuse and neglect, charges around something that you did as it pertained to a DUI, DWI, sorry, the criminal stuff is not my realm at all, or PI. In my experience as an investigator, yes, and helping nurses and their legal teams over the last decade, yeah, the board is definitely gonna be looking at that, because we take care of vulnerable people. So if it is around anything that puts a child, elderly, someone who is so vulnerable at risk, is that going to be something that they may pay a little bit more closer attention to? Yes. Now, does anyone have the opportunity for restitution? Yes. And so I tell nurses, you're going to have to produce, you're going to have to, every nurse, all of us have to prove that we are competent to practice, that we are fit to practice, and you got to start mounting that defense immediately when you're asking for the quote unquote, these are their words, not mine, privilege to practice. So going back to the question, if you have a DUI, a DWI, PI, and it rises to the level of felony, can you still practice? You can, but let's go down one little bit, another rabbit hole that oftentimes nurses don't think about, and oftentimes lawyers sometimes I don't think about either. And I spend a little bit more time with the nurse, because it is going to matter what National Practitioner Database codes, so NPDB codes, and possible OIG codes, Office of Inspector General codes, that are tied to those violations. And why does that matter? Because if you end up on some of these lists, and please, the nurses that have board charges, because I've talked to thousands of them at this point, all in various different stages, those codes will dictate your ability to be basically bonded. Remember, we talked about that insurance that I tell you need, and your organization has to have, every organization has insurance. When you walk in the building, you are, remember I talked about respondent superior, I talk about this in my intro to legal nursing course as well. You are covered under that by the organization when you walk into that building.